Hello and welcome to Rainbow History Class, the queer and trans history that you don't get in school. My name is Rudy Jean Rigg.
And my name is Hannah McElhinney, and I just gave my last name. Do I always do that?
I think you do.
All right.
I don't actually know.
My name is Hannah McElhinney, and I've got a shit hot episode for you today.
Oh my God.
Right, because we are talking about toilets.
Really?
Yes.
Oh my God. Okay.
Yes.
I'm gobsmacked.
I know, because you said, Hannah, you have to hold it on the lesbian history because you'll burn out too quick. Because you love it so much, you need to think of another type of topic. And so I said, well, what's my second favorite thing next to sapphic
Shitting?
stories? Yeah, toilets.
Okay.
As you know, as somebody like all hot girls has IBS.
Okay.
Hot girls have IBS. I want to talk about toilets. That's what we're starting with.
Is this because we've been having an ongoing incremental conversation about aqueducts?
We talk about aqueducts
A lot.
quite a lot.
I don't know. They just keep coming up.
They do.
Okay, so
But we will talk about aqueducts today, kind of. But yeah, I want to talk to you about toilets.
how are toilets gay? Or queer, rather. I don't want to know the heinous acts that have been done on a toilet.
I think that's what we're talking about.
Oh, great. Okay.
No, so I want to talk about toilets because toilets are continuing to be a political issue. We're seeing this in the run-up to the US presidential election. It's also been contentious here in Australia at various election periods. What we are talking about is the panic around toilets and who's using which ones.
Oh my God. I literally was like, okay, so here's the thing. For context, in my mind, I thought you were literally talking about the toilet itself.
That's part of it.
Okay, because when you talk about like old toilets being a presidential issue, I was like, what the fuck does Donald Trump want with a toilet? And then I realized
Probably
you're talking
doesn't use one that often because he only eats fillet fishes.
Ew. Is that true?
That's his main food choice, I believe.
Oh,
yes.
God. Okay. Well, that's another thing to judge him on. But I think when I think of toilets, can I be real with you? I hate saying I'm going to the toilet. It makes me feel disgusting. And I have to say, like, I always refer to it as a bathroom.
Yeah.
So I felt like I literally thought I didn't know what you were talking about. I thought
You're
you
talking
were
about
just
the
literally
actual like cistern and bowl kind of contraption.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is something inherently embarrassing about going to the toilet. I know of somebody who I had a housemate once who could not buy toilet paper, would always pay for it, could not
go and buy
it because that would mean that the person at the register
would know.
Everyone would see that, you know, he uses toilet paper, which I guess it's like harder if you're somebody who predominantly stands up to pee because when you engage with toilet paper, that means you're pooping.
Yeah.
Whereas if you are somebody who sits down to pee, it could be anything.
Wait, hang on. I'm sorry. I've never thought about this. People who stand up aren't using toilet paper?
I don't think so.
Hang on. How are we drying off? What are we doing? Hang on.
But when have you ever seen toilet paper at a urinal?
I have never looked at a urinal before.
I think they shake it off.
No, that's not clean enough.
No, I think they shake it off because at urinals and stuff, there's never toilet paper. So I think that's why it's more embarrassing for people who stand up to pee because when they do engage with toilet paper, that means they're talking about pooping. And I think that pooping is more embarrassing than peeing.
I cannot believe that people are out there giving the tree a shake and calling it a day.
They are.
They
absolutely are.
Diabolical. I'm sorry. I literally have never thought about this, but
Well, don't even get me started about how, you know, Western toilets are kind of disgusting anyway because we really should be using a bidet because let me tell you this, if you got peanut butter on your arm.
Yeah, and the hair, yeah.
Would you wipe it off with a tissue or would you wash it off with a tap?
Wash it off.
Right.
Yeah.
So already, like, toilet paper is disgusting.
Very least a damp towel. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so that's where we're getting with it. But what we're talking about beyond the actual contraption of a toilet, we're talking about toilet panic with regard, because this is a queer and trans history podcast, with regard to gender.
Yeah.
Now, the first thing I want to do before we do delve into the interesting history of toilets, because what I will get to and what I'm going to explain to you is how toilets are a tool for controlling people and how they've always had a strong political role to play. How do you navigate, as somebody who is non-binary, how do you navigate toilets, and how much of your time do you spend thinking about toilets?
I would say I think about toilets more than the average person, but probably less than maybe what I assume the average trans person does. Mostly just because, like, in my mind, I'm like, I'm never going to go into a men's bathroom. I'm just never going to do it. You just can't make me do it.
Especially now you know that there's no toilet paper at the
Especially now that I know what the fuck they're doing in there. I don't want a part of that. Keep me out of there. So I'm never going to go in there. So as a trans masculine person who can present quite masculinely and potentially like quote unquote pass and go into a men's bathroom, I'm still not going to do that. Number one, it's kind of just scary on all fronts to me. So I'm just like, I don't want to put myself in a position where I'm even thinking about that as an option. But I think I do think about it in the sense of like when I do have facial hair, I do often worry about like what's going to happen. To be honest, nothing has ever happened to me in an Australian bathroom, but twice while we were in America, it did. Once at I don't know what airport we were at, but once at the airport, the attendant was like, "What the fuck are you doing in here?" And then the second time was in New York. We were in a hotel having breakfast, and I went into the bathroom, and a woman was like, "What the hell are you doing in here?" Both times I had no facial hair, mind you. So like, I don't know what they perceived. So in that sense, like after that, I think those experiences made me think about it a little bit more. Now I try and go in with a face mask just because I'm like, if I'm obscured enough, people will just like not pay attention. But yeah, I definitely do you think about it when you go to the bathroom?
As in my gender or just?
Well, I guess anything. Does anything like get those cogs turning?
Like, so something that I am cognizant when you and I are together, particularly when we're traveling, is that like, say if we're having a conversation and we're going to the bathroom, I would never assume that you're coming into the same bathroom as I am. So I would always like try and stop that conversation so that you had like complete choice as to which bathroom you felt like most comfortable using. Yeah. Rather than just because, you know, often when there hasn't been a gender neutral bathroom and you've gone into the women's bathroom and we've been yapping, then like, I always find myself just being like, cool, make sure you stop that conversation so that you can use any bathroom.
Oh, yeah, no, whatever. No, I'm just
I feel like that's just like a weird thing that I have, is because I have all of these like micro rules going through my head at all times because of OCD, but that's kind of something that I am aware of. Yeah. Secondly, you know, just finding a toilet is kind of annoying. There is also something that I have experienced when I've had some friends. Sometimes I'll get a friend that's a boy, and
sometimes my friends are boys.
Sometimes I've been known to have a friend that's a boy, and when that happens, like a straight boy, when that happens, I want to bro out with them so bad. Like I just want to be one of the boys. Like I want to sink pints with the boys. I don't know why. I just get on one, and when that happens, I'll like go full. But where I miss a trick constantly is there is still something where I really like to have a friend go into the bathroom with me. So like I will enter the bathroom with them accidentally a lot and just be like, so we're still talking. And then, you know, they've told me at times like, I don't want to talk to you in the bathroom. Go and use the other bathroom. Whereas I'm like, but we're chatting and we're seshing and I'm with the boys. Yeah. So, you know, that's some time where I'm like, why do I have to go to another bathroom? I'm trying to have a conversation. However, yeah, obviously it is a huge, a huge issue of access, you know, and when you also look at, you know, accessible toilets, I think that's also hard because I think, you know, so often non-gendered toilets or unisex toilets are the disabled toilet. Yeah. And so then you're kind of like stuck hoping that you're not taking that space away from somebody who needs it in that moment, but at the same time that's the only space afforded to you.
Yeah, I think it is really difficult. I often like kind of hate using like accessible toilets because of that reason. Is like I don't want to take away that time or space from someone else who needs the mobility aids, for example, or the space that those toilets do afford, because I don't personally need them. But at the same time, like when it comes down to safety, it is really hard because it's like, what do I want to do? Like, for example, if you go into the men's bathroom, someone's going to look at you and mostly probably assume, oh, like silly girl, like gone into the wrong one.
For sure.
Like you're not a threat. You're seen as stupid, to be honest, like most of the
totally.
time.
And so often like it is a genuine mistake in terms of like I've been yapping and then I've forgotten my gender.
Yeah.
That is different to theirs and then I have to fork off. Like it just comes when I get on one.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's not a safety thing at all.
Yeah. Whereas like I've definitely like, for example, like the only thing that I have experienced in Australia, and like this is the last thing I'll say about it because I want to get to the actual history, but like I have been coming out of the women's toilet and then a man has crossed paths with me going into the bathrooms and has gone into the women's bathroom without checking the symbol on the door.
Based on the cue of you coming out.
On the cue of me coming out. And like multiple times now I've had men turn around and yell at me and like basically like out of their own embarrassment, I suppose, of going and walking into the women's bathroom, have come back and yelled at me about it. Like, hey, heck yeah, you know, like that kind of stuff. So I do recognize that there is aggression in these spaces that I think people think don't exist, like doesn't exist, but it does because like people just yell at you.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing. Like that's why you need to use the unisex one because that's what you want to avoid. Sometimes it's like, yeah, not today, Satan. I need to not be yelled at or run the risk of being yelled at while I'm doing what my body needs to do.
Yeah.
Well, we'll get into kind of the politicization of toilets, but first, just because poop is funny,
okay,
I'm going to set the context around where they've come from and how long we've been obsessed with them. So toilets are actually pretty new, right? Like they're pretty new in terms of the modern sense. There was like a big gap in like people caring about toilets for a couple of centuries, but if we go back to some of the earliest civilizations, so for example, back in like 3,500 BCE to like 3,000 BCE, that was in Mesopotamia, the Sumerians had developed like the first toilets. They're essentially these big pipes with holes in them. Your imagination kind of can fill in the rest, kind of like a latrine situation. But they weren't connected to a system. You know, it just kind of went into the ground or wherever,
that's
which is fine.
A system. That's
yeah,
fine.
But the first urban sanitation systems where it was clear that people had been thinking about just like a growing population and how many people needed to use the toilets and move the waste in and around was in the Indus Valley civilization, which is about 2,800 BCE, and it occurred in what is now like northwest India.
Wow,
Pakistan.
that's interesting. Great,
yeah.
okay.
So that is the kind of first sanitation system. But, you know, when we look at the beginning of what we think of the beginning of toilets, it's often centered around the Romans.
Yes.
So ancient Rome were really known for their public toilets. Like they made it their thing. Now, that is also because they washed their clothes in like urine. So I feel like that people have really loved that about the Romans.
Yeah, they really did make it part of their core brand.
They did.
Yeah,
they loved
warfare and urban planning.
Yeah, and a piss kink.
Yeah.
By the sounds of it. So the Romans were known for their public toilets, and this is something that I think is kind of really nice. They were communal spaces, so they were beautiful. So when they uncovered Pompeii, when they excavated that site, they found these like beautiful preserved frescoes on these walls. It was kind of like a big room with very close together seats with holes in them that would kind of go into the pit. And often like there'd be running water that would kind of help move things around. So, but it would have freaking stunk. So it was also, they weren't gender segregated at all. I think in certain wealthier women might have had options, you know, elsewhere, but it was a place of socializing. And so you would go to the public toilets and you would sit down and someone would sit down next to you and you just go and have a chat.
Okay, I have 2 comments to add to this.
Yeah.
Firstly, I used to have a reoccurring nightmare as a child where I would find myself in like a backroom style building and every room I went into were communal toilets. And the sheer terror that I felt listening to you tell me that that's exactly what the Romans did.
Yeah.
Unprecedented. Secondly, my gastroenterologist will tell you that you are not meant to spend any more time than necessary on the toilet because it affects your mind-body connection between your rectal muscles. So I cannot imagine how cooked their rectums were.
No, I don't think that they were like straining or pooping any more than they need to. I think they were sort of just sitting there and having a nice chat.
But that's the thing, like you're not actually supposed to stay on the toilet longer than your body is requiring to do the task because then you lose that ability of understanding like when it's appropriate to go and when it's appropriate to stop.
Yeah, and I think they think that for the Romans,
they don't care about their gastrointestinal health.
And they don't care about what's appropriate. They also don't care about kind of a lot of sanitation because they didn't have toilet paper in ancient Rome either. So
what were they
hate
using?
this.
No, what were they using?
A sponge on a stick, wait for it, that was communal.
No!
So
the cholera!
Yeah, so you would use the sponge to wipe yourself and then you would either wash it in a bucket of vinegar on whatever water was available and then the next person would use it.
Horrible histories never taught you this.
Yes, right. So that was like, so it was pretty grotty, but like either way, they obviously enjoyed using them because there were these spaces. And as somebody who says they don't like to stop a conversation when they go into the toilet, I kind of think that's nice.
You would have never left.
I would have loved it. I would have been there. I would be just like, who's in the hot seat now?
They would have had a plaque, like a park bench. They would have had a plaque with your name on it.
They would have. You know, imagine the
toilets.
podcast that would have been recorded in ancient Roman toilets.
This is
sorry. But what I want to talk about is the fact that they weren't gender segregated, really.
Yes.
So they were a community. They were a place for communities to come together, and in a sense, that is quite smart urban planning because they were public restrooms. They were like there was an element of access to them, and as we know through third space discourse and the loss of the third space, the public toilet in Rome was this third space, a place where anyone could go and kind of mingle and find community around the toilet. I think that's nice. But then the fall of Rome happened.
Damn it.
Yeah, right. And they really threw the baby out with the toilet water.
Yeah, it really went down the shitter.
They did. It went down the shitter. And when that happened, as you know, happened across many inventions that came out of the ancient societies. But when the fall of Rome occurred, a lot of the knowledge that had blossomed during that empire was lost. So a lot of that was kind of sanitation systems, aqueducts, our favorite topic, and things like that. So public toilets and even just these toilets in general and those sanitation systems fell out of fashion either through a lack of understanding of what they were and how they were being used through just people not wanting them.
Yeah.
I think probably the former.
I find it so funny. Like, can I just say, whenever we talk about the fall of Rome or like anything like that, people are always like, historians are always like, oh, we just lost so much knowledge. Like, how devastating to our modern understanding of history. Oh no. And then we go, hey, do you think maybe that also happened to queer stuff as well, just like in general? And they're like, no, that couldn't have possibly have happened at all. What are you talking about?
Yeah, exactly.
It's crazy. Like, anyway, go on.
Everybody mourns the fall of Rome, but also doesn't like to talk about the lost artifacts of queer history or Indigenous cultures.
Literally.
They just you know, colonizers will just come and be like, yeah, cool. So then nothing was there and then we were there.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
But like as soon as you mention aqueducts, they fall to their knees in
that
mourning,
respect,
in
I get it.
grief.
In that respect.
Well, as a fellow aqueduct fan,
Yeah.
we kind of get that.
An aqueductian. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like, you know, that's where we can agree with the colonizers that aqueducts were great.
Yeah.
Only on that. So we enter the Middle Ages after the fall of Rome. Everyone's like, what is that low-key toilet system? We're not interested in that. Bit weird. So instead, they had to make their own sanitation systems. Now, often that was like a chamber pot, which you would throw out the window once it was full. And that's how we got the invention of high heels.
Yes.
Because the streets were awash with sewage and the wealthy class needed to be elevated up out of the sewage so it didn't get on the bottom of their gowns.
I mean, I get it. As a short person who constantly has to clean the bottom of my pants because they're trailing along the decrepit earth, I really have a respect for that invention.
That's why we have high heels, yeah.
Although I do have a question. I am thinking right now, because when I picture this, and I'm sure it's the same for you and a lot of people, when you picture people throwing out their piss and shit onto the streets, I imagine it from at least a second or third story. So I do wonder architecturally, was that accurate? Like, were there buildings, particularly in Europe? Because I understand like in Italy where they were using a lot of stone, I know that they went up. But like whenever I think of like the Middle Ages England, I don't think about a lot of stone buildings. I think of wooden buildings. I don't know if you have a insight into that.
It's just wealth, really.
Okay.
So yeah, there were there were castles.
Yeah.
And then there were also, you know, shacks where it would just get thrown out the window. But we do know that there is that second story thing, which is why, you know, the man always walks on the left to shield the woman from chamber pots coming out of the second story window. But yeah, I mean, like medieval houses in different parts. You know, if you look at ones in you know, if you go to Amsterdam and see all the houses from those buildings, they're, you know, multiple stories upward.
I just wanted to fact
but but they knew how to make multiple story houses out of a bunch of different materials. So basically it stunk.
Disgusting.
There was something pretty cool if you did live in a castle, so you were wealthy, is you could use something called a garderobe. And yeah, so that's basically based off the French word for wardrobe. So it's like a wardrobe. It was like a literal closet. And they were built out the side of the building.
Oh, wait, is it the little kind of like almost like it kind of looks like a renovation stuck on the side of like a turret almost?
Yeah, and they're stuck on the side.
Yeah.
Almost like those rock climbing tents.
Yeah.
That you say an off the cliff face.
Yeah.
And often these because castles were often built near a cliff face for
strategic reasons.
Yeah, for vision and fortressing. You would basically sit in there. There'd be a seat, but there'd be a hole cut out of it, and you would essentially poop and shit and pee and whatever down the side of the castle into the moat or whatever was below. This worked very well because then you had a stinky moat, which helped fortify your castle. It also meant that nobody wanted to climb up certain walls of the castle. And yeah, obviously, but it was obviously very cold in Europe. So they needed to be kind of situated near kitchens so that they wouldn't be too cold for you to go and use, but not too close to the kitchens because they didn't smell good. And so to combat that, they used something called a nosegay. A nosegay, which I think is what I identify as.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah, essentially that was like a posy of flowers that made your nose gay, as in happy.
I'm looking it up. Oh my God. Wait, so was it just like...
It's like a little posy of sweet-smelling flowers that you would kind of walk around and sort of smell to cover up the stench of excrement that was everywhere around you.
Oh my God. Oh my God. There's an Animal Crossing character. There's an Animal Crossing villager called Nosegay. stop.
Yeah, it's a full thing.
Nosegay is an anteater.
Okay.
And they carry around a pastel floral parasol, and their catchphrase is honk. Wow.
So I feel like, yeah.
There you go. The more you know.
The more you know. The more you know. So that's a nosegay.
Okay, well, I love that. I love that they were really thinking about the the sensorial experience of going to the bathroom. They're really thinking about the heating.
Well, it's also
and the
there was
smell.
kind of a scientific thing behind it as well, because they didn't discover, like they as in humans, did not clock on to germs until really, really recently. So for most of the, I guess, Middle Ages through the Renaissance period, there was a strong belief that illness was caused by bad smells on the air. So that is why you had the nosegays, because the idea was that illness came in bad smells. So
Okay.
if you covered up the smell, then that was how you would combat the illnesses. So when there was like plague outbreaks and things like that, they would smell flowers, or they stick flowers in the masks. So because people believed that that's what was causing the illness. Also in their houses, they would shut all the doors and things and windows, locking it down so there was no fresh air, because they believed that stinky air from the outside would come in and make you sick, when actually that would have been exacerbating the problem.
And again, like, this is just white people. Like, because I cannot imagine, like, Indigenous cultures believing such fantastical beliefs around germs for some reason. Like,
germs and the idea of the smell being the carrier of disease was a European, like a Europe-wide thing. Different cultures have had kind of different belief systems about how illnesses come about. I think, when we look at these sanitation systems at the beginning, they were most sophisticated in that Indus Valley. So, Pakistan and India, that kind of region out of South Asia. But when we talk about the fall of Rome and what happened there, that's when we're moving into kind of like a Eurocentric perspective on toilets and what they think.
Is that why they also said to go to the fresh air, the seaside, like the sea air would cure you?
Yeah, they were big. They were big into air, just in general, and I totally get it. But I think, like, generally, as the population was growing, there was a big need for some, I don't know, shit technology to deal with the amount of waste.
Well, yeah, because it's like you're putting it into all the waterways. Like, there's a real, like, pardon my pun, like a flow-on effect here. Like,
yeah, and they were aware, like, for sanitation reasons and hygiene, like, it wasn't great.
No.
Waterways, everything was very polluted. So a few people tried different versions of a flushing toilet or a flushable toilet because moving the waste through was obviously the answer to the smell. So there was a man called Alexander Cummings who developed a flushable toilet. He also worked on the S-trap, which is an important part of the toilet that makes it smell better because it traps water in the bottom. So he did that. His name was Alexander Cummings. But it was really Thomas Crapper who got all of the credit for toilet development. And a bit of this is unfair. It was like, thanks to this, like, kind of satirical autobiography, it really inflated Thomas Crapper's, I guess, work in the toilet space.
Yeah.
What he did was a few things that optimized the toilet. So he slightly changed the S-bend. He also came up with something called the ball cock, which is like the nosegay. The ball cock sits in the toilet cistern, which stops it overflowing. Yeah. So he came up with that. He also, like, patented a lot of things. So he just sort of came in and took a lot of credit.
All right,
so given a lot of credit. He was kind of, he's not the mastermind behind the toilet. He just was a tinkerer and knew how to patent things.
Yeah, okay.
So
nepotism again.
Yeah. Exactly. He was just, like, powerful and took all the credits, and that's why his name Crapper was on everything. And that's,
Where we get the name the crapper.
the crapper. Exactly.
Is that a thing, do you think, outside of Australia? I don't know if Thomas Crapper's Australian.
No, he's not. No. There's Crapper, Thomas Crapper. That's what it came from, though. Like, you know, I guess the British Empire just did a lot of things, and popularizing the term the crapper was one of them. So now we are in the Victorian era.
Oh, love it. Okay.
So remembering that Thomas Crapper didn't really invent the toilet, we're going to go, he just patented a lot of stuff about it. We're going to go back a little bit to the Victorian era. So while throughout most of the Middle Ages and Renaissance periods in Europe, people were shitting off the side of their castles or into chamber pots and emptying them into the street. Around Victorian times, people were kind of like, okay, this doesn't feel that civilized. And in the Victorian era, being civilized was very, very important. And so this is really when going to the toilet became a shameful or embarrassing activity. So much so that if you did need to use the toilet in Victorian era, you would not be caught dead washing your hands afterwards, because that would allow the civilized company you held to know the shameful activity you had just done.
Wow. Really?
Yeah, absolutely.
So they were like, but hang on, but if you wash your hands, at what point are you letting on to other people, guys, wash my hands, they're just a little damp? Like, what?
Well, people didn't really wash hands. There was no hand washing really in most of the Victorian period because they hadn't discovered germs yet.
Oh, yeah.
So it was more about like you would only wash your hands if you
like
got something
soiled
on
them. Yeah.
So, yeah.
And toilet paper, not invented yet, right?
There was a range of things used before toilet paper. Corn cobs
Are you serious?
were often used. You could also buy like different toilet, like depending on your wealth, there was like early kind of toilet paper sheets that you could use. But basically, yeah, essentially this was when we started being, okay, we need to be very civilized, and going to the toilet is not civilized. You contrast that to ancient Rome when it was like such a normal thing that you would just go socialize on the toilet. The toilet was like the gym. So
I really hate it when people talk to me when I'm in the bathroom. I hate it.
I'm such a yapper.
I know. I've been sitting there sometimes and you've been in like 2 stalls down and I'm like, for the love of fucking Christ, do I need to get out my noise cancelling headphones? Like, I just can't. I would actually rather hear the sound of someone pissing than have to hold a conversation and know that we're both pissing at the same time. Like, I just can't. I don't know. It's really, I love that private time in the bathroom.
Okay, noted. Julie noted. So when in the Victorian era, they were absolutely just wrestling with the role of toilets in society, and how can we take this uncivilized behavior that humans need to do and hide it. We were also wrestling with the role of women in society. So in like Victorian period, there was this separate spheres ideology, right? So there was like the public sphere and the home sphere. And women were supposed to be relegated to the home sphere, while men would be the leaders of the public sphere. So that was a really important distinction of the Victorian period. And it really came from the idea that like women were inherently vulnerable and needing of protection. So this is really where you ramped up the idea of like women as this hysterical, weak, sex, and men being the protective, stronger sex. And so it was basically what that meant was women didn't really need to access toilets because they were at home and women didn't leave the home that much. So most toilets were developed for men. Now, there was at this point the idea that like men and women there was like an inherent sexualization of the toilets, that men and women should not mix in sort of these spaces.
Is it because the toilet was a public sphere feature.
More so because of that. And then
Yeah.
I think, people were talking about like sexual assault and things like that. However, like sexual assault was illegal. So it's not really the best way. You're not just going to be like, oh, well, let's just give women their own toilets if they keep being. There was also more of this public-private sphere situation. And so men were kind of, I guess, deemed predatory. So whether or not they were assaulting women or if there was a sense that they would and wouldn't be able to control themselves against doing it, I'm not sure. But as a result, women couldn't use the toilets that were up until this point just by default for men because women were at home.
Yeah.
So during the suffragettes period, they were really fighting in around World War One for women's toilets because that would let women leave the house.
Yeah.
So they were like, okay, fine, we're not going to use these toilets. We need to have toilets for women then so that women could leave the house and be near a toilet. And this is where we start to think of like toilet access as a control issue.
Yeah.
So if you want to control a population, controlling when, where, and how they use the bathroom is a way to do that. And we see that now when, there are issues with, men's toilets being socialized where you can go and stand in a line of a urinal and be out very, very quickly. Whereas for some reason, women have been socialized to using the toilet in a cubicle, sitting down, and that means there's less space for less people to use that toilet.
Yeah.
So it is an issue of control. There's always typically like less women's toilets in a lot of spaces. They might be further away. And of course, they're less accommodating.
Yeah. That's so interesting because even as you said, like, oh, women couldn't leave their house because there's no toilets. There is like a huge demographic of trans people who just don't feel safe like using bathrooms and therefore won't go to like certain places unless they know that there's a bathroom that's safe for them or like things like that. Like even, for example, I would say now in thinking about it, like, so if I'm like for some reason at a huge shopping center, like I won't go to the most like busiest toilet because I will have to wait in a line and it's almost like I feel like I'm visible for too long. So I'll literally like take myself up to the other end of the complex where it's like less busy so I can slip in and out, So it is really interesting when you do start to think about it.
When you think about like the use of toilets to control, what lawmakers are doing with their toilet laws and by lack of access to gender neutral toilets or all gender toilets, they are forcing a group of people into the home to not leave the home and then say, the cop outs of like, let's make the disabled toilet or the only, all gender toilet available. Well, that's one person that can use that. So you are restricting the accessibility of a number of people into a space by way of only providing one toilet versus like the men and the women's toilets or whatever having like lines up of cubicles. So what that is like, yeah, you're controlling a population. And I will get to race and how that affects it in when we get a little bit later into the 20th century because I want to give you this really funny fact. But basically what they needed to do then was after World War I, they had women were fighting for the vote. They'd also had to perform a lot of men's jobs during the wars. And so women rightly were fighting for their right to work and have independence, have jobs, earn incomes, things like that. And so the factories needed their work. So they did get jobs in factories where their labor was needed. But then the men were very concerned because women obviously needed to use the toilet when they were at work. And, men were like, oh my gosh, now for the first time ever, there are women that I'm seeing when I'm using the bathroom. This can't be moral. This can't be okay. So it was really like the men, along with the women, fighting for women's toilets. Now, the people in charge of making the women's toilets were like, okay, well, women belong in the home. So how are we going to just deal with the fact that women are supposed to be in the home, but for capitalism reasons and war, they need to be in these factories. So what we need to do is make women some toilets that are the extension of the home.
Okay.
Right? So that they are never far from home. So what they did was women had like less work hours than men because they were considered weaker. They needed rest periods, which meant that the architects needed to put in things like fainting couches.
Yes, I remember in the early 2000s, like a lot of places still had these couches.
Yeah.
And like little like vanity areas and like little coffee tables.
It was super important in the early 20th century for all toilets for women to come equipped with fainting couches, just so that in case they become overcome with, I don't know, being alive, they could faint onto something soft.
Oh my God. This reminds me of that little photo shoot we did in that American hotel bathroom that had that incredible like foyer to the toilets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The pre-toilet lounge is also something that helped flag the entrance to a more home space for women. And it was really just because people couldn't work out, all right, well, I need you in the factory, but I want you to feel like you're at home and you might faint at any moment.
Is it bad that I kind of want to bring this architecture back?
Well, toilets were
you know what I mean?
beautiful in the, after the 1920s. The toilets that they were making were like sort of boudoir style.
Yeah.
Like they were stunning. So yeah, I think that is nice. But I guess when we look at then these toilets, and now this is the first time that we've got like gender segregation in toilets, and the idea that toilets can control a group of people, that's when we look to, segregation in the Deep South and Jim Crow laws that, mandated, Black people of all genders using a different toilet to the white people in the house. And there's this famous photo that would have like men, women, colored, these three doors. And often, the toilets designated for African-American people would be further away, or they would be outside of a lower quality, something where it made it really, really hard. And I think there's a good piece of mainstream film where you can see this.
Wait, are you talking about The Color Purple?
No, I'm talking about Hidden Figures.
Okay.
So in Hidden Figures, which is a story of the rocket scientists, the people that these women that worked at NASA, they really struggled because they needed to walk a really long way to use the toilet that they were allowed to use. They had to walk across like the campus and come back. And so when I guess people at NASA saw that was the case, that's when they, pushed to have, all people being able to use the toilets that were previously just for white people, white women. And so I think there was a quote that was like, I'm going to find this. They got rid of the colored bathrooms and said, we all pee the same color.
Oh my God.
Here at NASA, we all pee the same color.
Wait, that's an actual quote NASA put out?
Allegedly. And it's, I don't know. It's not like confirmed. I also think Hidden Figures is one of those films like The Help that's been very whitewashed and packaged up for a white audience that somehow makes like the white person the savior. Like I'm not saying that it's like a really documentary representation of a time period, but I just think that it shows toilets.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, like to have a subplot of a film be about like toilet usage, I think is really crafty in terms of illustrating a point. But you're so right. Like if there's one thing that irks me, it's white saviorism. So yeah, for sure. 100% on that. I just think it's really funny. It reminds me again like of The Help, where the scene where she's like, eat my shit. And I'm like, you say it, because that's so right. And it reminds me of like these like when I think about how stupid humans can be, like this is such a good example of what I would use in my argument, because I'm like, guys, I think we've got a really big problem with what's going on up here. Like,
yeah, no, this is the whole kind of, toilet thing is wild. I think there is also a sense of like, you know, repetition in the history. So I think like when you have the people with the most social power, the thing is going to the toilet is an equalizer. And so after the Victorian era, when everyone had been shaped to feel really embarrassed and ashamed of going to the toilet, well, then you had people like, you might have like white women that did not want anyone to be, you know, to see them in this state, or there's this sense of vulnerability. So it brings out a lot of fear. And I think that's what drives, you know, a lot of the discrimination around toilets, you know, this idea of kind of, this is me in my most vulnerable state. And there was like the idea that, you know, Black Americans were inherently predatory, more so than white Americans in the mid 20th century. And now we see that the same with trans people. Now, when we kind of moved out of Jim Crow laws, though, you know, arguably, you know, that wasn't like a definite end by any means. When we move later, we've seen the moral panic around toilets evolve from race and then into sexuality. So in around the 90s, what you did have was the idea of gay men as predators, loitering in toilets. And this is something that I remember, like the idea that, you know, there were sexual predators in bathrooms.
yes, yep.
And when I think about it, what's so funny is the amount of talk of deviant men was often about gay men. And yes, because toilets were gender segregated, the toilet was a way that men could meet other men.
Yeah.
And there was like an element of privacy. There were stalls. It's kind of the perfect beat.
Yeah.
So you did have men meeting up with other men in public toilets, and that was because there were, you know, gay clubs were illegal. There was nowhere else for them to go.
But it doesn't make them a predator.
But it doesn't make them a
that's
predator.
The thing.
Yeah, and so often, like, I think I remember just having this idea that there would be predatory men in the toilets. When I reflect on that now, there is no way in hell they would have been interested in me. They were just going for other men. And of course there are like, you know, horrible stories of the opposite happening that I don't want to like make representative of the like the whole picture.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the idea of like sexual deviants hiding in toilets were quite often like gay men at a beat.
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting is if I reflect back on when I grew up in an area on the beach where there are a lot of tea tree bushes, and everyone was always saying there are perverts in the tea tree bushes, there are flashes in the tea tree bushes.
I remember growing up with that as well. Like
the coastline of Victoria was very much, they would talk about that. And I was always terrified that, you know, someone would be a pervert in the bushes. What that actually came from was those bushes used to be a beat. And so they weren't predatory to you. They were just having sex with each other.
But also like growing up with like, parents being like, oh, like don't go into the bushes. There's like perverts in there. I'm like, why are you not vetoing the bushes before you let me run in there? Like, are we not scoping out and we're not casing the joint first?
The idea of like that predator in the bushes is something that we all grew up with, but we know like in terms of statistics and facts, it would be a staunch minority of predators that have ever sat in the bushes waiting to attack an unsuspecting passerby. Bushes are full of twigs. Bushes are a little unwieldy. They are hard for grown men to fit within. And to be honest, most predators go after people that are known to them.
Yeah, and in their homes.
In their homes or at like a bar.
Yeah.
Not a spiky bush by the sea.
Yeah.
No, that is why there's so much queer coding to these arguments. And when we get to, toilet blocks, that comes into it a lot. So there was a real panic around sexual deviants and perverts in toilet blocks in the 90s. And it really came to a head in 1998 when George Michael
I was going to mention it if you didn't. Yeah.
was entrapped by a police officer. Now, at this point, this was really reinforced because they would send undercover police officers in to go and have sex with gay men in public toilets. Now, what a job if you're a gay man.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Be an undercover
Toilet
cop.
pervert. Yeah.
Yeah, great. And so that is how they were getting these news stories that would just come out. And it was like, well, the cops, that was you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. You want a mirror, buddy? You want to just take a look in the mirror?
yeah, it was you that came in and were having sex with men in the toilets. Like, what? So, you know, we've also had this like real moral panic, you know, and then I think that's where you get this kind of thing of, you know, obviously you've got sex segregated toilets, the idea that like toilets are at all sexually charged. Having said that, it's like no one has ever said toilets, like the different gender segregations of toilets over time, no one's ever said that they're sexual. Like it's come out of this idea of like, well, women, they're exiting the house and, you know, like everybody is just trying to do their business.
Yeah.
It's only later after these moral panics that we kind of try and build on them.
Yeah, I do think it's really like the sexualization of toilet spaces is really weird to me. I'm just like, nothing about it is sexy. Like I'm not yucking anyone's yum. Like if you love a public toilet, that's fine with me. But like inherent, like objectively, it's not what we consider sexy. Like as a kind of general public. And yeah, it's like if these are sexual places, like it doesn't, like being sexual and being a criminal are different things.
Well,
like,
yeah.
do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
Totally. And I think, you know, there's no, if they were sexual spaces like they have been for gay men, it's through a lack of other accessible options. So it's all about accessibility. And yeah, so I think this idea of like women's toilets being infiltrated really goes back to that sexist kind of early 20th century ideal that women were weak and, you know, needed a fainting couch. And I think that's what we're talking about today when there's these laws everywhere, this idea of trans women in particular going into women's bathrooms, this idea that like there's a predator coming into the weak women.
The home almost.
The home. There's this homey space of the women that's supposed to be this safe space. And what?
Because it's kind of funny because it's like when you think about it, like when you, like if I say it this way, right? Women's bathrooms were made for them. Men made their own bathrooms, you know? And so it's like, so it goes back to the like men can defend their space, like, and that goes into the whole like men are strong, men are like defenders, they're attackers, like they assertive, whereas like there's a sense of women's bathrooms were made to protect them, like that's just what the case was.
And keep them out of sight, and keep them away from the public, keep them hidden. Because
as you said, like, you know, urinals are a public, a popular form of like toilet usage for men, you know, particularly as well. Like I know a lot of men feel embarrassed to use a stall because they don't want people thinking that they're shitting. And so it's like it comes back to the whole like the actual practice of toileting for men is more public, and so therefore there's more visibility on what happens, whereas like again we have this kind of hidden mystique around what goes on in a women's bathroom, which then plays into the whole like anyone could be like a woman could be attacked and then we wouldn't know, so we've got to stop it before it even gets through the door, sort of thing. There's so many things to it.
I have one memory of being at a music festival that was really resoundingly criticized. This was years ago for having not catered with enough toilets for women. There were urinals and urinals and urinals for men, like, you know, really, really easy. They could in and out in 2 seconds. The line was it was, you know, 2.5 hour line just to use a toilet. And so there was this big willow tree, right? And so at this point, I was like, you know what, I'm not doing this. I'm just going to go under this willow tree. And then as I did that, a lot of the other, people in the toilet line, the women that were waiting to use the bathroom, came under and did the same thing.
Oh my God.
So we'd actually created a Roman public toilet under this willow tree where we're just having a chat about what music that we'd seen, and we were just going to the bathroom, and then all the women just came under this giant willow tree and we were just all peeing on the ground.
Oh my God.
The cops came and they tried to arrest us.
Oh God.
But they were so nervous about coming under the canopy of the willow tree because then they would...
Sorry, just to paint a picture, the willow tree, the kind of branches had kind of made a coverage.
Yeah, like it was a complete like willow tree. So you had to kind of part the tree branches and go into this space. So in a sense, it was kind of private. So the cops that were men, they were just standing around this willow tree trying to place us under arrest.
Oh my God.
And being like, you have to stop. And I remember saying... Officer, I'm midstream.
Don't disrupt my flow.
Yeah. And I was like, this is the problem. This is the problem where you've got like a male-led institution assuming what women need. We didn't have any control, but like ultimately if we did, we created, I guess, a non-sexualized space where we could just have a chat and pee in peace. But, the whole like layers of, predatory and, you need to do X, Y, Z was kind of placed upon us with these poorly designed toilets that didn't actually meet the needs. And that same rhetoric is coming out again when we talk about like trans women, as if, again, we're back with the fainting couches and, weak women couldn't handle what? Someone else using the bathroom. It
doesn't make sense to me. Like, I've had the most pleasant experiences of my life using gender neutral bathrooms where people are just rolling in and out. Like, it's it's pretty bizarre because I'm like, why are you literally like? It's that lack of nuance and that like again like moral panic of like I don't know what the word is, like the phrase is escaping me, but it's like, it's not trans people that are the problem. It's predators that are the problem. And like confusing trans people for being predators is like the whole crux of the issue. And it's not even predators, it's men. So really the issue isn't to do with trans people at all. It's to do with men. The men don't want to like look themselves in the mirror and recognize that it's everyone, it's all of them.
Well, I also just think, if you go to a lot of these, and I'm talking about TERFs now, but I think if you like tell them and just give them the timeline of history where you're saying you're using the same rhetoric that was used, in Jim Crow South, that, where there was this idea that African American people were inherently predatory. You're using the same rhetoric again that was used all through the 80s and 90s that, gay men were inherently predatory. And now you're using it the same again when you're talking about trans women being inherently predatory. And the through line is that like what us women are weak. The only reason that anything other than pooping and peeing happens in a toilet, as in like makeup and things like that, comes from this really sexist idea that like toilets need to represent the women's home because women shouldn't leave the home. Yeah. And so the J.K. Rowlings of the world are just basically, despite claiming to be feminists, just recycling the same old sexist garbage that they claim to be fighting against.
The thing that I'm struggling to like not find an argument against, because like I think inherently their argument's silly, but like the whole like I've noticed a lot of TERFs or people who are taking like anti-trans like sentiment is like they're going no, we're acknowledging that there is like a difference between men and women and that's okay, but we still deserve our own space. Like they're actually subjugating themselves. Like I don't know if it's for political reasons and they don't truly believe it, or like they do believe that women are like in some ways not as good or below men, inferior.
Weaker, or...
like, and they're saying, and they've they've had to 180 themselves so goddamn hard that they're having to bring in these like, you know, like early 20th century ideals. It's like it's kind of pathetic. Like
anything a man can do, I can do better, except
not
going to the bathroom.
Yeah.
Because,
That's the thing. They're not even saying anything a man can do, I can do better. They're literally saying anything a man can do, I can do probably the same but differently because I'm biologically a woman and that's fact. Like, I'm like, what the fuck?
It's a complicated, turfy argument. But I think that's when we look into like the rise of bathroom bills. Again, what we can see is that the bathrooms, the issue of what we do with a population of humans who need to use the bathroom, who have to excrete waste to survive, has been an issue for governments and, you know, urban planners since, you know, 3,500 BCE, right? No one's really cracked it, but it makes sense that because we all need to use the bathroom, all of our deepest prejudices get projected onto these spaces for really no good reason. We just carry all this baggage when maybe we just need to go back to Roman times and just go and have a nice chat with whoever rocks up on the seat next to you and then just share a sponge on a stick to wipe your ass.
If that was the case, I actually don't know what I would do. I'd probably rather go into the wilderness. Like
I don't think a lot of people did that.
But I just know. Yeah, I don't think that I could use a communal bathroom like that. I don't know whether that's coming from my nightmare trauma or my personal desires of how I want to use a bathroom. I just can't believe you would do that. I can't believe that you would say that would be an okay thing for you to do.
You know what? I'm not necessarily advocating for any of that in the common sense in the current day. But what I am advocating is to strip the baggage away from bathrooms and let people shit and pee however they like.
Yeah.
So that brings me to the end of the episode on the history of toilets and their intersection with queer and trans people.
Well, thank you. I feel like I have the power of knowledge now in combating people who want to advocate for these silly bathroom bans because as we now know, thanks to you, a lot of stuff just comes back to misogyny and sexism.
It's all misogyny in the end. It's all misogyny in the end. But hey, if you really liked this episode, please tell us and leave us a review or give us a 5-star or even just hit follow on Spotify. It really, really helps. And then also, hang out with us on Discourse? Instagram, Discord. Join the discourse on Discord about toilets and Instagram and TikTok.
Yeah, and we've got a Patreon that does have a free tier. So if you can't or are not interested in chucking us a few coins, which you can obviously do to access our exclusive content, you can jump on the free tier there and we often share some exclusive bits to those of you who are class cuties in that tier, as well as, you know, you can stay up to date with lots of different pieces of information that will hit the Patreon first. So thank you so much, Hannah, for taking us through that. I'm going to be thinking about this every time
on the toilet.
Yeah, and I hope that leaves my mind quickly.
Well, look, I'm going to leave you with some last words, and these are some words that I would scrawl on the back of a toilet door, and that is, not everything is gay, but there is gay in everything, including toilets, because everyone on this earth gotta go when they gotta go. And now we gotta go.